Yeah,
Mm.
so as you mentioned, you first moved to Adelaide, right? And it was 6 later, the approval
Yes.
of your PR. Now, Kay,
Mm.
please share with us, especially mentally, how did you prepare for the move? Especially moving into a
Yeah.
country, not knowing what job is coming up to you, and with all the
Mm.
so-called, relocation anxiety, how did you cope with that as a migrant back then?
Actually, actually, back then when I think along the process, right, when before my visa even approved, right, I think I really done a lot of like research and things about that I might end up in Adelaide because I was like we are submitting the visa against state sponsors, so Adelaide was
Yes.
one of the destinations that I may end up with. So
Yeah.
I actually do a lot of preparation. I think mentally wise, I know where I want to be, and I know that this is for my kids as well. So I kind of like make sure that I do like comparison as in like what school that my kids should be going, and then like what kind of suburb they want to stay. Yes, job
Mm.
is one of the key concerns because like back in Malaysia, I'm also doing quite well, as in like I have a good job and career as well. But I
Yes.
think the moment I embark to migration on this migration journey, right, I already know things that I need to give up. For example, I might not get or progress the way that I progress as well to like in Australia, because at the end of the day, you still move to a new country. You are considered a newcomer in that country where
Mm.
maybe you don't have like experience in that local. But I already well prepared because the moment I start my migration journey, I have to kind of like set my mind right. This is the challenges that I'm going to face, but in view
Mm.
of like what my end goal is going to be. So
Mm.
I know very well this is the benefit that I'm going to get. So
Yeah.
it's just a matter of navigating and do
Mm.
whatever research that I can and talk to people. And I read a lot of like challenges that people face during that application as well. In those like I went to website, there's a website that I always go into and read about how people disappointed, how people felt like all the challenge that they face and stuff
Mm.
like that. That really keeps you going because at the end of the day, you always felt that it's not only you facing this challenge, because actually there's a lot of people that actually applying for the visa also face that kind of challenge. But it's just
Mm.
like more on how those challenges kind of like become your motivation factor to kind of like to drive the thing differently or navigate the stuff that differently. So that's really keep me going as well at the same time.
Mm. Well, based upon what you have shared, Kay, I think the key here is about
Mm,
having the
mm,
right expectation and setting the realistic expectation, right?
yeah,
So I think you have
correct.
mentioned
Yes.
early, you have mentioned importantly, you were already mentally prepared. Your job in Australia might not give you the same
Mm,
level of rewards. You were
yes.
even prepared to take a step back,
Yes.
right? I think these are
Yes.
very
Yes.
important to not to have
Mm,
disappointment and the shock, and the changes, from Malaysia
correct.
or from your home country, when you move to Australia, if you were expecting all, to be better, but then, when you were
Yep.
not having the same experience, then you will have a big disappointment. So I think the key over here is to
Yeah.
have the right expectation and reading out,
Correct.
like what you said,
Correct.
you've done a lot of research and heard about what the
Mm,
challenges and experience people were facing. Yeah. And then
yeah.
you felt sort of mentally prepared. Yeah.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Because when you move there, right, it's not only
Yeah.
about you, let's say, especially those with family, because at the end of the day, right, your kids are actually looking up at you as well. So if you don't manage your own expectation, right, so how are you going to navigate or make sure that your kids settle well in that country? So that's
Mm.
what I have to make sure that I have the right mindset as well, which I already kind of like prepared. If to
Mm.
be very honest, struggle you still have. It's not that you won't have any journey that you embark, right? There's still struggles and things that is not in place and stuff like that. But I think as what you say, perception and also like what the mindset on managing the expectation is very, very important in this context.
Mm, mm, mm. So you mentioned about
Mm,
job, for example, but
mm,
what
yeah.
sort of, when you first moved to Adelaide, right? What sort of
Mm.
challenges were you facing as well?
I think when I moved to Australia, especially when I moved to Australia, right?
Yes.
I already have this expectation that I might not end up with the job, that the type of job that I'm doing in Malaysia. But to me, that's fine. because so at the end of the day, it's like when you move to a new country, I don't mind to start like even lower than what I'm supposed to like back in Malaysia compared to back in Malaysia. But it's more on like looking at what is in the market or what can you do to land you into the job that you wanted to do. For example, I think I have some friends that is also like starting their job as part-time when they reach there, for example. It's more on like that, what they are looking for, right? It's more on like your local experience, regardless whether you're doing a part-time, whether you work in a cafe, or it's more on the interaction that they're expecting you, that you have an interaction with like local community, for example. So I actually started with at the first few months I didn't really work because I want to make sure my kids really settle down, because at that point my kids was only 7 and 10. So I just want to make sure that they are really settled down with the local education and the environment and everything, because the moment the kids are settled down, to me is a peace of mind, because then I will be able to concentrate to look for a job and stuff like that. So my first job was actually working as a volunteer in Australian Red Cross for 2 or 3 months, I think. Then I got then my superior was the one that become my referrals to my job in my first job in Australia. So that's the one that they care. Even though I worked for 20 years in Malaysia, yes, you have the skill and experience, but when you move to a new country, to them it's like, have you ever worked in a local Australia environment before? I think that's what they care. So even today, you work as a part-time in a cafe, or you work in a retail store as a customer service, but these are experience as well, and they eventually can, or your superior at that point of time can also become your referral for your future job as well. So I think people just have to be a bit more open-minded in the context where, yeah, volunteer job, of course, it doesn't come with money, but if it's depending on what you know, what you want to achieve from there, I think then that's where it will get you to where you want to be.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. So you mentioned you first started working for Red Cross. That obviously
Yes,
is a volunteer job, right? So,
yes, yes,
and that actually increased your employability, yeah, and landed you
yes,
with the
that's
first
right.
job, right?
Yes.
Were, did you get the idea of working for volunteer from the forum that you read, or how was it? How did you come across working for that volunteer work,
I can't
working
remember
for Red
how
Cross?
do I end up with that. I can't remember how I end up with that, but I just know that I can't be just sitting there and not doing anything, as in like to kind of like expose myself to whatever that I can actually explore. But I do have like meet some friends that I know when I was actually when I migrate to Adelaide, right? I don't really have friends there. I totally only have one friend, and what that friend of mine moved to Sydney in the same year that I moved there. So I basically don't really have any friends in Adelaide, and I'm bringing my two kids together with me. But
Mm,
before that, I met a group of people that is also on the way to move to Adelaide, or they already got a visa but have not moved. So that's where I got to know some friends from there. And then we was
mm,
talking about it, and then they was like saying, oh, maybe we can try part-time job and that kind of thing. So those are the conversation or the things that you get to know.
mm,
That's where I kind of like, oh, maybe I should start with like volunteer, because volunteer job in Australia is actually something that is, even now my kids are also doing volunteer job, because it's something that's quite big in Australia, if you ask me, as in like a lot of things that is actually volunteer, so like even my kids sports and everything, all the parents are doing volunteer, so those are really big thing and something that people actually look out for as well, so that's why
mm,
I would encourage, if let's say any of you like really migrate to Australia, if you haven't landed in a job that your ideal job or whatever, you can
mm,
always think about volunteer. Because even recently I've spoken to one of the lady from Hong Kong. She started in this call, they have this called adult migrant English program or something, is where those people who doesn't speak English, and then you give volunteer to coach them, to teach them English. And that lady was doing that, and then she ended up a job in the particular organization, and it's one of the biggest Australian non-profit organization to provide the English support to people that come from country that doesn't speak English as well. So those are the
mm,
pathway you can actually explore before
mm,
you land on a permanent job, or a job that you wish to have, and stuff like that.
mm. So, I mean,
Mm,
back back then, before you moved to Australia, you had a high flying
Yeah.
job, holding high
Yeah.
responsibility. And
Yes.
it is amazing that you started off, with the volunteer work, which helps
Mm.
up, eventually it paid off because it landed you with also a very good job to start off with. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
other than offering yourself, on the volunteer work, right?
Yeah.
After all these years, after being 8 years in Australia, as a new migrant, what would you suggest? Is there any tips
Mm.
that you think they could actually helps to increase their employability as well?
I would say it's like you
Mm,
might not end up with exactly the job that you're doing in Malaysia, but I think that you should be a little bit more open-minded, as in like to explore yourself, as in like apart from what you're doing, you can also
uh,
explore as the job that you do. I mean, like any other type of job, because to me, it's like what I told you is like it's about the local experience that they need, because if you
mm,
only stick back to what okay, I only know how to do this job, but I'm not going to apply any other job, for example. But this one will actually restrict in terms of your chances as well, because it doesn't mean that other job that you are not exploring. Yes, you are not good at it, but doesn't mean you cannot do it. But if let's say there's a chance for you to actually explore that part, I think you should don't confine yourself as in like, oh,
mm,
I just want to do this one. I don't want to do any other job. But that would be like
mm,
that will be kind of like reduce your chance as well in that context. So I think
mm,
let's be a bit more open-minded, because
mm,
it's just for a temporary. To me, it's nothing is going to be permanent. At the end of the day, it's just a temporary stages or phases that you have to go through. Eventually you will land at where you want to be, based on whatever that you do. Because as what I told you, my ideal destination is Melbourne. So I just want to get to Melbourne eventually. So I would
mm,
just have to find my pathway to build to there as well.
mm. Yeah. And you were
Yeah.
sharing with us the other day,
Mm, mm,
after working several years in Adelaide and now you moved to Melbourne,
yeah.
and they were
Yes.
offering you, all the relocation package and for
Yeah.
you from
Yes.
Adelaide to Melbourne. Yeah. And
Yes.
talking about that, right? How did you start
Mm,
off as a migrant, adapting yourself
mm,
in an Australian work culture? As you mentioned earlier,
mm.
and the question has always been, do you have a local experience? Are you adapting well,
Yeah.
with local culture?
Yeah.
So how
Mm.
did what did you go through, and how did you brand yourself into the Australian culture over the years? Can you share with us?
I think how do I blend, as in like I would say is that
Mm,
I think back in Malaysia, right? I generally is not really I'm just work, pick my kids and then go back, and that's all I do. I don't really engage in a lot of activities and stuff like that. I think when I moved to Australia, definitely the first thing I gain is the time, which is I have a lot more time apart from working. Because working in Australia or even the local culture, the work-life balance is definitely one of the number one that I felt
mm,
very blessed, because in that context,
mm,
I have a lot more time apart from working, because then I managed to kind of like involve in my sports, and also like involve a lot more in my kids' activities, schools and stuff
mm,
like that. Because mental
mm,
health and also work-life balance or
mm,
well-being is one of the key things that they emphasize a lot in Australia. So it's the way that you have to understand what local things, for example, the local like the way that local. To be very honest, right? My company, some of the people, we don't really work very late unless you really really have deadline. If not, otherwise, I shut down like four plus. I start work at 8 o'clock, but I finish at 4 o'clock, for example. And we don't really work like the way that Malaysia, like the Asian culture work, which is like work over the weekend. You send email at midnight, and we don't really in Australia culture they don't really do it, so we have to kind of like indirectly adapt to that kind of culture as well. Because
mm,
generally, if you ask me as an Asian, I think we work like Desmond. Now you're still in the office, that kind of situation, you work late and everything. But in Australia culture, you have to adapt to, because this is what they care. Like family is your priority, well-being is your priority, mental health is priority. So you
mm,
somehow rather you blend into their culture in a way, because this is how their
mm,
working way culture is compared to what you used to be. So I learned
mm,
how to adapt that as well in
mm,
here, which is
mm,
work-life balance. So that's what that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about, the work-life balance, yes, I totally agree
Mm,
with you because I went through the same journey, right? I used to
mm,
work for Pricewaterhouse Singapore. And then,
mm,
when I first when I moved to Pricewaterhouse Sydney, and I had a total
mm.
shock because we hardly have to work late, right? So, and that's
Yeah,
also how
yeah.
ended up it gives me extra times to pick up the migration law, and get myself registered to be a licensed immigration
All
advisor.
right.
Yes. So
Okay.
I think that is actually the beauty. But then,
Mm,
also the work culture is very different, as in, mm, like you say, they when we meet the colleague, we always say, "How are you today? A good day," and
yeah,
but rest over here, you
correct.
walk into the office and you turn on your computer and you started sitting down and then to work without
Strict.
having to
Yes.
interact so much
Yeah,
with each other.
correct.
Yes. Is that
Correct.
also how,
Yeah,
how did you
yeah,
adapt to all these small little differences
yeah.
when back then, and when you first
I
arrived in
thought it's like
Australia?
it's more like I think it's like really about the mindset and the way that you have to really adapt and embrace changes, because I think like just like driving, for example, I give you like example for driving. Malaysia driving is really, really I don't know how do you name it, but when you come here, right, you have to drive the way that Australia drive. If not, you get a lot of fine. So that's how it works. So over the years, I meet a lot of different people. I talk to different people. Even like the way that I talk very fast when I was in Malaysia, but here I can't do that because it's like the speed that we're going is. So that's how when you communicate with local, you start to understand their culture and everything. I would encourage people to join more community kind of events and gets to know, like even you send your kids to school, you can get to know the local the people, the kids parents, and talk to them. You will try to
Yeah.
understand the different culture that they have. I mean, like we have to be very open and at the same time try to like look at how the culture is. You have to adapt into the local culture, because if you really want to like really stay in Australia and kind of like really blend into their culture, I think it's very important to kind of like observe how their culture is and stuff like that. I think there's another good example that I can give to you. I think in general, if you
Mm,
have a birthday party in Malaysia or in
mm,
any Asian country, you have a lot of food that is on the table, which is like you have like fried chicken, fried rice over. But when you come to Australia, when they call, let's say, invite your kids to a birthday party, you don't expect to have all this. Maybe you just have finger food like nachos, or maybe like cracker with cheese and stuff like that. So that's the difference of culture that they have. For example, they don't really always go to shopping mall, but they spend a lot of time outdoor. So those are the things that you have to plan in a way to
mm,
understand. Oh, this is how they spend their time. They can sit the whole day in the park and just
mm,
having picnic, but
mm,
so those are the different kind of culture. But I think over the years, so long you stay there and you are open, you have to be
mm,
have an open minded to really blend into the culture. If not, you felt
mm,
it's a struggle for you. I do have friends that struggle as well, like the weather is cold and then it's like it's very hard to get food. It's not like as Malaysia, you can just go to hawker store and stuff like that, but here it's a little bit different. So a lot of things you need to cook at home,
mm,
and
mm,
you need to, because if you eat out, it's quite expensive. So those are the adjustment of lifestyle that you have to adjust to the
mm,
way that the how they actually how local Australia does the thing, So
mm,
yeah,
mm. Interesting. Now, uh, can we talk a little bit about the Australia education system? Because I must say, majority
yeah,
of the
yeah,
clients, whenever I ask what motivates them,
yes,
to go through that journey, and
education,
the children's education and the kids has always been one of the top priority, right?
yes,
So when you first moved to
yes,
Australia, your kids were like 8 years old, and yeah, 7, 8,
7 and 10,
7 and
yeah,
10. Yes.
7 and 10,
And
yes.
how do you see the differences of Australia education system and the education system that you put them through before the move? Do you want to share with us about how do you see them picking up? Yes.
Okay, I think education system is very different in Australia compared to back in Malaysia, because I think back in Malaysia in general, the way that they run the education, right, is very, to me, is very academic. I don't know how other people feel. Maybe if you send to international school, it could be different. But to me, because my kids went to public school, so academic was very academic driven, which I didn't really want my kids to grow up in an environment where academic is the only focus. I want them to involve in sports. I want them to involve in like having other skills that they acquire, because to me, education is academic is important, but the other element comes in is also important, because this is how you can actually cultivate. For example, social skill is also important. Communication skill is important. So that's why education was one of my really top priority when I decided to migrate, is because of the education. So when I moved my kids to Australia, the education system is a little bit different. They are more on like they don't like academic, like having test exam every now and then. They cultivate a lot of like communication, like speak out and like make the kids like free, like it's very free in that context. Kids learn in a very different way, and they don't sit here and just do homework for the matter. And then I get my kids involved in a lot of sports as well, which is like especially team sport, which is very popular in Australia. Generally, a lot of kids on the weekend, that's where parents would send them to team sport, because I have two girls, so my two girls involved in netball, which is team sport. So to me, those are the things that I see very different in education compared to a very academic, because I always felt that if all these things comes in, right, somehow rather your academic will not be worse off than you are, that kind of situation. So that's why education is my number one priority. Why I decided to migrate to Australia is because of that way of the education, how education in Australia is very different from how the conventional way of how Malaysia did it in that context. But I wouldn't compare like international school, because I also don't know how international school run in Malaysia. But I do have friends that send the kids to international school as well. According to what she told me, it's also somehow rather has some academic element like focus, because of the environment that you're in, because somehow rather you're still in Asian country. So compared to a westernized country, which it's not that they don't focus on academic, but they focus in a very different way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Other than the education system, right? Yeah. How, in general, kids adapt from Asian culture into an Australian culture? Will your two kids went through some challenges? How they are adapting with the peers? Did you notice anything that particularly that you
If you
need to pay attention when they first move over?
Actually, if you ask me, because my kids moved pretty young in the context, especially the younger one, she's definitely that is the easiest to adapt, because she moved at the age at 7, which is like to her, it's like any environment is cool. She doesn't really, but because my kids also speak English when they are young, so it's not a problem for my younger one. But my elder one, because she's already 10 when she moved here, so somehow or other she already have certain education like that she got it from Malaysia, which is like more like academic or stuff, a more structured way of doing. So for her, when she moved here, she doesn't really struggle. She doesn't really got problem like mixing with friends, but you can see a little bit different of like maybe she's not as extrovert as like what you expect, because like kids in Australia are very extrovert, because they will just speak out and stuff like that. So she took a bit of time to adapt in that context, but she's very open-minded, because I think it's also important for parents, if let's say before you move to Australia, you also have to, other than managing your own expectation, you have to manage your kids' expectation as well. So what I meant in this context is more on like sharing with the kids of, oh, we're going to move to Australia, okay, how Australia environment is going to be and stuff like that. I think it's also important to share with your kids where are they heading to at the same time, so they don't get that kind of like culture shock, for example, in that context. Because I did brought my kids to Australia before we even migrate to Australia, so it's just more like to give them to have that kind of exposure, or this is how Australia is, and things like that. So I think throughout the journey, I involve my kids in that journey. So that's why everything that I do, or every step that I do, maybe they may be too young to understand, but it's more on like how do you get them be part of your journey? So that I think that one is very important as well. In terms of adapting, I don't see my kids struggling in that part because generally kids are easier to adapt compared to adult, like, if you ask me. Yeah.
Right, right. Well,
Mm.
you know, I heard the same comments from many other clients, especially if
Yeah.
the kid is at the younger age, you know, they adapt
Mm.
very well compared to kids who is already at the secondary level, school level, or high school level,
Mm.
or, you know, university
Yeah.
level, right? Because
Yeah.
they already molded, you know, with you know, certain preference, you know, and
Yes. Yes.
certain circle of friends, and it takes
Yeah.
them a
Yeah.
bit longer, you know, to adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is true.
Correct. Correct.
One credits that I must give you, we mentioned earlier, we mentioned about having to repeat the test for so many times, right, during the application. But you know
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Kay is now, you know, also an English teacher for the migrants who doesn't speak English. So you see what she had transformed, you know, from being, you know, someone having to sit for so many round of English tests to someone who is actually teaching the English to migrants who doesn't speak English. So, you know, while Australia is called a land of opportunity and also a lucky land, right? Do you
Mm.
see, as a migrant after 8 years, do you see Australia as a land of opportunity yourself?
Yeah, I
I mean,
do.
this is strictly, you know,
I
your
do.
personal opinion. You know, I think this is totally, if
Yeah,
you're
I
comfortable,
do.
you know, with this question,
Yeah.
this is strictly a personal, you know, opinion. Yes.
Mm.
Mm,
Mm. I still see Australia a lot of opportunity in the context. It's like, I think there's a lot of things that you can explore apart from what you're doing, your usual job that you're doing. I think there's a lot of other opportunity that you can explore. As what I told Desmond and Audrey, I
yes.
still, even though my kids are grown up, because my kids is already, one is 18, which is in uni, and another one is like 15. So there's a lot more other things that I wanted to do as well, apart from what doing my usual job that I'm doing. I don't know. I just still see a lot of things that is on my plate that I still want to do in Australia, as in being like personal development or like
Mm.
any other things. It's just too many.
But you know, yeah, what is your next plan? You know, like, do you have any next big plan
Yeah, I
coming up?
do.
Yes.
Yeah, apart from my 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday, I do have plan wanted to pick up like a course, like to, because I wanted to work in a cafe to kind of like, even at my age, I still want to learn. I still want to adapt to local culture like a little bit more. I always told my boss that I say that I think the customer facing I wasn't very good. I need to improve that. So I told him I wanted to work in cafe. So I wanted to kind of go and take a course and just like so that I can land a job to work on the weekend in a cafe. I even wanted to explore maybe like to do a psychology course because I felt mental health and well-being is very important in Australia. So
Mm,
it's something that I really want to do and interest as well. So those are the
mm,
things that I think working in Australia, it gives you a lot of opportunity where you get support from your boss or your company and stuff like that, that you can do a lot more other than your 9 to 5 job that you can do.
mm,
And I told Desmond and Audrey that I don't even run in Malaysia, but I'm actually a runner now in Australia because I had so much time for my own self-care and also self-development as well at the same time. So that's why I told them I have a lot more things that I wanted to embark and explore, that kind of thing. But back
yeah.
in Malaysia, I stuck in traffic like 2 hours a day. So I already lost 2 hours a day. So which I can do a lot more other stuff in Australia. So that's the difference of, I would say the quality of life is really very different if you ask me.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, we have seen,
Sorry, sorry
sorry,
to
Audrey.
interrupt, Desmond and Kay. We have another 10 minutes before we start the Q&A.
All right.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll wrap up, you know, some
Yeah.
important questions.
Meanwhile, everyone, you can start typing in your
Yeah.
questions right now. And while we still have more interesting questions, but please continue to type in your questions while the session is going. Okay, sorry, continue.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Hey, you know, it is very interesting. You mentioned, you know, you are a runner now, right?
Mm.
So you have more time
Mm.
to stay, you know, to
Yeah.
stay fit and healthy. Yeah. And when we went into the Zoom, jumped into the Zoom with you the other day, after your email, me and
Yeah.
Audrey were very surprised to
Yeah.
see transformation, because we can see how vibrant, like you're more energetic now. You are really more energetic. Yeah, and for that, very happy for you. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, from me, when I would like to share this experience, from, my recent trip to Perth. So I started to
Mm.
develop also, when we talk about, Australia, always finding out, new experience and not, right? And I
Yeah.
never ever thought I like to, and in my recent trip, right, I never thought I ever like, to go for stargazing. And this is actually very famous
Mm.
and popular in Australia, and you go and look at the sky at night,
Yeah.
because the sky is so clear with the beautiful stars and all. And from my recent trip, I started to develop the passion, the interest, on all this stargazing. And I started looking at, the top 10 stargazing spots in the world. And I noticed that there are so many beautiful areas to actually develop this, to experience this stargazing. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's also another aspect that I found, which is also essentially very important. Because,
Mm.
no doubt, being in this migration industry for 20 years, right? Clients
Yeah.
always ask me, where is the best? Where is the best? My honest answer is there's no single country or place, for,
Mm.
called the best. It could be
Yeah.
good enough for this person, but it might not be good enough for another person,
Correct. Correct.
right? But what I came across, right, as I'm getting much older and older, I'm almost approaching 50 now. So I noticed, like, for example, when you travel, and to drive safely, to drive slowly, and to be
Mm.
able to walk on the street with a proper pavement system, it is
Yeah.
actually, very, very valuable to me,
Yeah.
especially when your age is catching up. And that is something that I think it comes over the times. I never pay attention to this kind of uh this kind of the privilege, available in
Mm.
Australia until lately from my recent trip, right? So I think, this is parts and parcel that comes, a lot as times goes, and when the needs
Yeah.
arise. Because back then, right, parents were telling me, hey, you know what, I need to be in Australia. And I have always been worried about them because, like, at this
Mm.
age, can you adapt well, when you move from
Yeah.
a country, Asian country with this Asian weather, to
Yeah.
Australia during winter
Mm.
and all. But I think, like I mentioned, what I'm trying to say over here, right? There's some plus point, there's some,
Mm.
some aspect and area that may not fit into your shoes. But
Correct.
overall, I do believe that Australia is a country that is very livable. Yeah, it is really,
Mm.
really
Yes.
livable. And in terms of the culture diversity and also the opportunity, I mean, I would like to share the opportunity from this perspective. Like, in Asian
Mm.
culture, when we look for a job, right, the employer always look for someone who is being in this position for X number of years. You have to be good
Mm.
enough for me to employ you in this position. But in Australia,
Yeah.
you can be an IT professional and your first job
Mm.
can be in logistic. You can be a
Yeah.
marketing
Something else.
specialist, but your first job is in the police force, holding
Yeah.
some totally different position. So I think what you have shared
Mm.
earlier is actually very important. Like, you need to open up, to think that
Yeah.
you might have a skills in different aspect, and do not limit yourself, to only
Correct.
specific industry that you have been doing for years. Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
And Australia does provide this kind of opportunity if you wish to,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
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 Now, reflecting your journey, okay, compared to 11 years ago, what do you wish you would have known before making the move to Australia? Is there anything that you think that you miss out before the move, or what would you have? Yes.
Actually, I wouldn't say that I miss out anything before I move, but I think if I know that this is what I'm going to get, I think I'll move earlier to Australia instead of waiting like when my kids were 7. I don't think I miss out anything in particular, but I think if given a choice, I would want to move earlier because move earlier than what, because when I moved that time, as I told you, my kids are 7 and 10 already. If you give me a choice, maybe I wanted to move earlier than that, but everything happened for a reason, right? So I guess I guess it's the right time and stuff like that, and it's just like where I end up in Adelaide, and 5 years later I moved from Adelaide to Melbourne, that kind of situation. So
Yes.
it just happened at that time. I wouldn't say that I miss out anything, to be very honest, because yeah, if I can move earlier, it'd be even better. Yeah.
Right. Well, good to hear that. That would means, you really see Australia as your home now. Yeah. And how often
Yeah.
do you travel back to Malaysia nowadays?
Once a year during summer holiday, which is usually like
Summer
5 to
holiday.
6 weeks during summer holiday. Because
Right.
I think one thing also in general in Australia, right, when I don't know in Malaysia now, because like let's say for example you take leave, I don't know whether your boss allow you to take like 5-6 weeks kind of thing, but in Australia it's very common for people to take leave like 4-5 weeks or whatever, that kind of situation. So it's
Right.
not something that is unusual. So I usually come back during summer, like for like about a month or something. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would like to keep the next question to the floor, but with just
Yeah.
one question
Yep.
for you, Kay. What would you offer? What advice would you offer to a new migrants, right, looking to establish themselves in Australia? What would you say to them?
I think the first thing, just do it, as in like there's no right or wrong there's no right time or wrong time. It's just like so long your move with the calculated risk that you already factor in, just do it, don't wait further. And secondly, when you move to Australia, I think just to try to embrace the changes and then be a little bit more open-minded in that context, and having a very strong mindset is very important, as in like always revisit what's your intention at the first move. Why do you want to move to Australia? I think that one is very important to keep you going wherever that you have like struggles or you face challenges. Always remember that why do you at the first place move to Australia? Like for me, education for my kids is my number one priority. So whenever that I have challenges that I face, I always make sure that this is why I come here. So it's for the better, for my kids, for the sake, and that will gets you going. So I think strong mindset and positive mindset is very important to embrace the challenges that you have and the whatever that you're going to foresee in the future when you move it. But if you can move now rather than later, I think you'll be better rather than you continue to wait, because I always felt there's no right time. When is the right time? Earn enough money, then it's the right time? Not really, but age, as your age catching up, maybe it's difficult to adapt. So maybe you just have to do it, So long you make sure you have like, to me, it's like so long whatever calculated risk that you already factor in, I think that's good enough. That is like what you need to, whatever that comes up, you just have to face it and find solution. When you are there, you'll be able to make it, because to me, it's like if you know that you are migrating because of your kids, you definitely try your whatever that you can to overcome those things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kay. This is really
No
a good
problem.
piece of advice to everyone here, right? And now I'm going to leave the next question to the floor.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Okay.